Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Jewish Museum. My name is Jenna Weiss. I'm the manager of public programs here. We're going to get started. Just a second. It's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's program, Unorthodox on Religion, held in conjunction with our current exhibition, Unorthodox, which is on view through March 27th. The exhibition features 55 artists from around the world whose practices mix forms and genres, highlighting art's key role in breaking rules and traditions. Tonight's program is made possible in part by the Edmund de Rothschild Foundations and is part of a series presented in collaboration with the 92nd Street Y. The remaining events in the series are Unorthodox on Museums, a half-day symposium on unconventional museum practices next Sunday, February 28th from 2 to 6:30 p.m. And Unorthodox on Philosophy, taking place Tuesday, March 22nd at 7 p.m. at the 92nd Street Y. For full details about all of our upcoming public programs and events, please visit our website to sign up for our e-news. Now to introduce our speakers for this evening. Alan Levenson is the director of the Schusterman Center for Judaic and Israel Studies at the University of Oklahoma. He has written extensively on the Jewish experience for both scholarly and popular audiences. His book, Between Philo-Semitism and Anti-Semitism, Defenses of Jews and Judaism in Germany, 1871 to 1932, was nominated for a National Jewish Book Award prize, and his textbook, Modern Jewish Thinkers, is used widely in classes on Jewish thought. He has received numerous awards, including an American Council of Learned Societies Fellowship, and has lectured in the United States, Israel, and Germany. Recent projects include The Making of the Modern Jewish Bible, A History of Bible Translations and Commentaries in the Modern Era, and The Wiley Blackwell History of Jews and Judaism, on which he served as general editor. And his essay, Syncretism and Surrogacy in Modern Times, Two Models of Assimilation, is included in the catalog for Unorthodox. Journalist Susan Katz Miller is a former Newsweek reporter and the author of Being Both, Embracing Two Religions in One Interfaith Family, a book based on original surveys and interviews with interfaith family members, clergy, and religious educators. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, the Christian Science Monitor, Time, Slate, New Scientist, Moment Magazine, and many other publications. Her work on interfaith children has been featured on several NPR programs, NBC's Today Show, the Jewish Channel, and many other media outlets. Miller writes regularly for onbeingboth.com, Huffington Post Religion, and for the Jewish Daily Forward's Interfaith Families column, Seesaw. You can find her on Twitter at beingboth. Both authors, just a note, have books available for purchase down in our bookshop tonight, and I just wanted to make one reminder to please turn off any cell phones before we start, and join me in welcoming Alan Levenson and Susan Katz Miller.
I want to thank Jenna for that nice introduction. Can all hear me? Yes? Thank you for the introduction. I want to thank my family and friends for showing up, some college classmates I haven't seen in a while for showing up too, and thank my old friend, and also college classmate Susan Katz Miller for joining me this evening. I wish I had called an audible at the 11th hour because my topic's a little bit dour, so maybe I better start with a joke. A century ago, let's say 1916, Jacob and Joseph, two newcomers to America, are off the boat having a Saturday walk, and they see a man sitting on a bench with no head covering, smoking a cigar, and clean-shaven, and reading the Jewish Daily Forwards, which was, at that time, the fourth widest circulating daily in the United States. And Jacob turns to Joe and he says, "America, what a wonderful country. Here, even the Gentiles read Yiddish." My 3 points are qualitative, but it's a metrics-fixated world. So I will start with a couple of numbers. American Jews constitute less than 2% of the population. I know it doesn't feel like that in New York City, or Brookline, Skokie, Beechwood, or Boca Raton. But it is true, American Jews live in many places without Jewish neighborhoods or institutions, but more importantly, wherever they are, Jews live lives very interwoven with non-Jews. The affiliated among the American Jewish population, agency leaders, activists, clergy, professionals, have successfully organized their lives around holidays, synagogues, or institutional involvements. But this is a very small group. Even American Orthodoxy, for instance, comprises less than 15% of American Jewry. I also bracket out from my discussion tonight Israeli Jewry. Any Jew or any non-Jew who's visited Israel will know how different it feels to suddenly be in the majority, to hear Hebrew, to watch stores shut down Friday night, to live by a Jewish calendar. Whatever the dangers facing Israel, and there are many, there's no danger of Israel losing its Jewish vitality. Now, individually, the American Jewish situation is a pure success story. In no other country have Jews been so well integrated. There's no downside to identifying as Jewish in America, though a considerable downside to identifying as pro-Israel if you happen to be a college student on many American campuses. Taken individually, however, America has remained the promised land, and anyone with a sense of history should never take this for granted. But let's talk about the Jewish mainstream, the majority. The 2013 Pew Research Survey makes it clear that millennials will have more non-Jewish friends, non-Jewish partners, and non-Jewish children than every other generation has. Now, let me emphasize, I am the product of this phenomenon too. Every single member of my family, I guess except me, is or has been married to a non-Jew. I am in no way suggesting that intermarriage is a problem that has to be solved. There's a 67% chance my 18-year-old son will find a non-Jewish partner. I don't say marry because it's not clear that millennials will marry. It's not clear they will have children, and it is clear that many will consider themselves none when asked what is their religious affiliation. So the question I want to ask tonight is, can the Jewishness that those of us who are 50 or older and grew up in an area of Jewish settlement, will it survive the 21st century? Here's my cheesy chart. Sue's suggestion, thank you very much. Not to make it cheesy, but to have a chart. Let me suggest 3 areas that lead me to conclude that what I knew as Yiddishkeit growing up will not be around in 100 years. First, member of the tribeness. Genetic testing has helped avert many diseases. Ancestry.com has given people a sense of their roots, but neither impels action on behalf of others the way old-fashioned ideas of Jews as a family has. This idea, embodied in biblical phrases like children of Israel or house of Jacob, is far older and more indigenous than the concept of Judaism as a religion. Family feeling has inspired Jews in our own lifetimes to rescue and resettle over 100,000 Ethiopian Jews and help open the doors for over 1 million Jews from the former Soviet Union. This is tribalism, very simple and very effective. To say we should fight for freedom for everyone is laudable, but I think less likely to lead to action. Without this familial self-concept, anthropologists call it fictive kinship, I do not think Jews' ability to galvanize politically for any cause will survive the 21st century. I don't even think it will survive the next generation. Point 2. Mordechai Kaplan famously defined Judaism as an evolving religious civilization. I could give a long lecture about what Kaplan meant by evolving, not orthodox, and what he meant by civilization, not reform. But what Kaplan meant by religious was that all civilizations have their own qualities that connect people vertically through time and horizontally through space. For Jews, a major strand of the cord that connects us to Jewishness has been Judaism. I celebrate cultural Jewishness, gastronomic Jewishness, comic Jewishness. My uncle, related to many people here, Sam Levenson, was a pretty well-known comedian in his day. I celebrate any kind of Jewishness, period. The more the better. But in an ever-secularizing first world to which the millennial generation of Americans has finally acclimated, religion remains a very minority position. Roughly around a fifth of all American Jews define themselves as Jewish, and that Jewishness is religious. Put bluntly, only particular forms of religion make it possible to walk into a synagogue in Budapest or Costa Rica and feel at home, make it possible for a Jew by choice or even a historian to say God and God of our fathers without laughing, make it possible to recite the mourner's Kaddish in tears even without knowing any Aramaic. Like fictive kinship, religion is a force that can inspire action, admittedly, often bad action. Like fictive kinship, Judaism seems to be increasingly foreign to the vast majority of American Jews. We celebrate Hanukkah, so close to Christmas, but skip Sukkot. We have a Jewish calendar at home to plan Seder, but don't know what Jewish month we're in. Adar Rishon. We attend our friends' funerals and simchas, but we would feel odd saying grace after a meal, though we may enjoy the fictional Reagan family doing it on TV's Blue Bloods. Third point, sechel, Jewish smarts. It's a source of pride. We pat ourselves on the back that we've racked up so many Nobel Prizes, roughly 20%. Personally, I take greater pride in the fact that the majority of Jews, men for sure, but I think women too, have been literate for quite a while. American Jews are a well-educated subsection of the population, 58% having attained a college degree, a quarter having attained an advanced degree. When American Jews marry other Jews, they marry well-educated urban Jews. When they marry non-Jews, they marry well-educated urban non-Jews. No doubt these 1.9 kids per family will continue to be above average. The situation looks good on first glance. There are Jewish bookstores, book fairs, book clubs, but I think, aside from the fact that we live in an age when reading plays a lesser role, there are other concerns. And there are three quick ones I'll do. First, we're living in a world in which reading a Jewish language, defined as Hebrew or any other language written in Hebrew characters, is a skill possessed only by Israelis, the Orthodox, and sometimes professors of Jewish studies. Second, 62% of American Jews say being Jewish is about ancestry or culture. But that can be a meaningful statement only if American Jews know something about that ancestry or that culture. Third, learning in Jewish tradition has always been a communal act, and not only a private one, has been a sacred act and not only a utilitarian one. Will Jews continue to read with Jewish content? Whether it's the Bible or Geraldine Brooks or even David Brooks, will Jews continue to read together? Will learning, active learning and discussion and argument continue to be a defining part of our culture? American Jews will proudly tell census takers, demographers, that they identify as Jews. Why not, when the cost for being Jewish is so low and the cachet of having some non-WASP identity so high? But what will such a declaration mean? What will it do? What will be lost if we surrender Jewishness for mere Jewishness? Four things. What will be lost is the ability to organize on behalf of other Jews. The most serious failure, because the most tangible. Second, a tradition, what will be lost is a tradition of progressive philanthropy. At my university, the University of Oklahoma, the Gaylord family gave who knows how many millions for a football stadium. But what family gave money for a school of social work? The Zaros, third-generation immigrants from the Pale of Settlement. What family is helping Tulsa fall into a black hole in culture and education and public health? The George Kaiser Foundation, also third-generation Pale of Settlement Jews. The Schusterman family, my sponsor, or my program sponsor, built a campus in Tulsa, particularly to provide social work, health work, and educational workers for that city, that poor and minority city. Third, what will be lost are the institutions of Jewish life. American Jews have given generously to JCCs, Jewish Family Services, museums, Jewish studies programs, I think to the general benefit of Americans. But we cannot expect non-Jews to support such institutions to the same degree, any more than I can be expected to send my biggest check to the Catholic Diocese of Oklahoma City. Finally, what will be lost is the distinctly Jewish note in American culture. Maybe you don't like Tin Pan Alley or Borscht Belt humor or the New York intellectuals of the 1950s and 60s. Maybe you don't think Philip Roth is a good writer or Woody Allen is a good filmmaker. American Jews will continue to create as Jews, but only if they continue, as Mordecai Kaplan said, to live in two civilizations, one of them Jewish. To conclude, historian Simon Ravidovich called Israel the ever-dying people, ironically noting that in every generation, Jews have predicted their imminent demise. Ravidovich suggested this was a defense mechanism to provoke exactly those commitments to ensure a future. If I'm speaking in this vein, nobody will be happier to have been proven wrong. Thank you very much.
I want to thank the museum, and I want to thank my friend Alan for inviting me to join him on this program, perhaps because I'm the most unorthodox author he knows. I don't know. So, a rabbi and a minister walk into a bar and sit down in a booth together to plan a wedding or a baby welcoming ceremony or a coming of age ceremony or a funeral. This is obviously not a joke. It's the reality in my three-generation interfaith family. And I don't see that reality as part of an orthodox, unorthodox binary, or an authentic, non-authentic binary, or a Jewish, Jewish binary, because I see those as false binaries. If I asked you all to raise your hands if you're in an interfaith marriage, or if your parents or children are, or if your siblings or aunts or uncles are, it would be everybody in this room. Am I right? This is who we are. And yet we are here at a Jewish museum, fretting about our Jewish future. So I claim you as my Jewish and interfaith tribe, because this is who we are now. But I want to start with my own story, because I think it's important when you hear people making proclamations about interfaith marriage or the future of Judaism that you understand where they're coming from. And I'm coming from a very specific place. 25 years ago, that rabbi and that minister planning a wedding were planning my wedding. Alan was there, as a matter of fact, at the wedding. And they witnessed the ceremony where I married my husband, and 3 days later, we moved to West Africa. I got off the plane in Dakar, and I realized I was a nice Jewish girl married to a Protestant boy working for a Catholic organization in a Muslim country. We settled in there, and after a few years, we had begun celebrating Jewish holidays and Christian holidays and Muslim holidays with our Senegalese friends and neighbors. A few years later, we moved to northeastern Brazil, where the majority Catholic community simultaneously celebrates a lot of African religious traditions that were brought over to Brazil. And I think that both of those overseas experiences contributed to the decision that my husband and I ultimately made to raise our interfaith children with an interfaith education. But to understand that decision, we really have to go back a generation to 1953, when my Jewish father met my Protestant mother. They struggled for 7 years with whether they could get married. It wasn't common in the 1950s. But they finally took that leap of faith and had 4 children. Very glad they did that. And they made the decision to raise their children Jewish. They did what most clergy are still urging families to do, which is to pick one religion. So my mother became a first great exemplar of what's sometimes called an all-but-conversion mother of a Jewish family, or as she sometimes calls herself, a common-law Jew. So she learned to make matzah balls, and she studied Hebrew, and she ushered all 4 of her children through the bar and bat mitzvah process. And I think my parents made an excellent choice. It's a choice that works for a lot of interfaith families, but not for all of them. And in my book, I write about the idea that no matter what pathway your interfaith family takes, whether it's choosing one religion or the other, or both, or none, or all, or a new religion, each of those pathways is going to have specific challenges and specific benefits. But none of those pathways is going to erase what I think of as the interfaithness of the family. The children are conscious of this. Even if you give them a single religious label, a single religious education, they know who they are because they go to their cousin's bar mitzvah one week and their other cousin's first communion the next week, and these are formative experiences. And I would posit that they can be positive experiences and not simply problematic. I think one of the reasons I have such a positive outlook, Alan said I'm the optimist on stage here today, is that my parents, who are now 91 and 85, have one of the longest and strongest marriages I've ever encountered. And it's impossible for me to not know that, and it does color my approach to this topic. And so I was really motivated in writing my book to get that more positive story out, because what I saw in the literature about interfaith families was very fraught, very worried, very negative. Now, in the fall of 2013, two things happened. One is that I published my book, and the other is that, as Alan mentioned, Pew Research put out their big study on the Jewish American landscape. Now, the statistic in there that popped out to me was that 25% of intermarried Jewish parents are raising children partly Jewish and partly something else. Their words, not mine. My family, we don't talk about being part, being fraction, we're whole. But anyway, these are my people, the people who want interfaith education for their interfaith children, in spite of the fact that they're being told this isn't a good idea. And 25% is very significant. So my book seeks to answer two questions about that trend. One is, why are families doing this, and how do they do it? I surveyed 250 parents who were doing this, who were raising their interfaith kids with both religions, and 50 teens and young adults who had come through formal interfaith education programs. And I can tell you why they're doing it. They're doing it because they are alienated by the exclusive liturgy and policies that marginalize interfaith partners. And it's because they don't want one partner to feel like a guest in the religious life of the family. And it's because they see religious bilingual literacy as a way to ground and connect the child to both families, and they see that grounding as an advantage in our increasingly complex global environment. So what does it look like? How do you do that? For my family, it meant being part of an intentional grassroots national movement, which started here in New York with the Interfaith Family Community, IFC, which is 20, how old now, Sheila? 25? Yeah, in 1987. And Sheila Gordon here was one of the founders of that group. Over 100 families now throughout the New York metro area are part of that community, and there are similar large communities in Chicago and in Washington in which I raised my own kids. What they have in common, and then there are smaller groups in Philadelphia and elsewhere all doing this. What these groups all have in common is that in a religious education classroom, they pair a Jewish teacher and a Christian teacher so that the kids have a source on each religion to interact with. In my case, in the Washington, D.C. group, we also have a rabbi and a minister on staff as spiritual leaders. What does this mean for the kids? In my survey, more than 90% of the kids who'd gone through these programs said that their parents had made a good decision to give them an interfaith education. Close to 90% said that they were not confused, and the majority plan to raise their own children with interfaith education. Now, I know you want to know how they end up. I can't answer that question. Part of the reason is that I interviewed them when they were teens and 20s, and they really hadn't ended up yet. None of us ever really end up. Pew Research has shown a tremendously high rate of religious flexibility and fluidity in America. All of us are disaffiliating, changing affiliation, going to two different types of worship at the same time. And that's not just interfaith families, that's all of us. But I can tell you that more of these children raised within interfaith education are leaning Jewish or choosing Judaism. What does that mean? For instance, the majority of them are involved with Judaism on the college campus, either through Hillel, through social activism projects like Challah for Hunger, or through Jewish-related coursework. My daughter, who's a senior in college right now, has been involved in all three ways. And keep in mind, she only has one Jewish grandparent, my father. So, I would posit that this is not bad for the Jews. But what does it tell us about the survival of Judaism? To me, it says that Judaism is extraordinarily compelling, that if we give kids connection to texts, to history, to ritual, to theology of Judaism, even in an interfaith education context, that they will find it compelling, that they will choose to be engaged. Of course, we all have the privilege, in a country with religious freedom, of religious choice. In this 21st century, our ideas about race, culture, religion, gender no longer fit into binary models. All of us are rebelling in some way against either or labels and claiming both and identities. I claim Judaism for myself and for my children, despite denominational disagreement over whether I have that right. But I also claim the interfaith tribe, creating DIY identities and communities in a liminal space that is filled for me with vitality and creative energy. I have faith that both ancient and renewed forms of Judaism will continue to survive and inspire, even as they continue to change and adapt, as all religions do, as they have always done. At the same time, I insist on seeing interfaith families as bridge builders, peacemakers, and ambassadors between religious communities, helping to reduce the toll of religious misunderstanding, intolerance, and violence. And I think the question now for Jewish leadership, institutions, and communities, for all of us, is whether to continue to exclude the 25% of Jewish parents in interfaith partnerships who are giving their children interfaith education, or whether to engage with those families as a dynamic part of the greater Jewish community. Thank you.
I think Sue and I agreed that what we'd like to do immediately is to just open up the floor for questions and comments.
Yes.
Okay.
I have a question that either one of you can answer, but I think it might be particularly pertinent for Alan, given he spends a good deal of time in Oklahoma City. And this has to do with how politics is impacting Jewishness and identity. And that is, I'm sure you're familiar with what happened in California with the young gal. How is that playing out? Has it played out? You can elaborate so everybody will know what I'm talking about.
Thank you, Elaine. Let me say, first of all, I think there is probably, Sue and I agree on more than we disagree, for sure. And in terms of including people as members of the tribe, I am absolutely all for it in almost all circumstances. I just want to be pretty clear about that. It's also true, though, that I probably, living in Oklahoma, have a somewhat sharper sense of Jews as a minority than somebody living on the East Coast and living in especially a liberal and pluralistic enclave within the East Coast, as you know, which is great. I wish I did. Tacoma Park or out the Upper West Side, or again, many places you all can think of as well as I. So I think I ought to say that it's I think a little bit, it's almost natural that I would see the Jewish minority status in a way a little bit differently than Sue would. Now I'll get to that, which is, first of all, the incident that Elaine is referring to, it happened at UCLA last year, but there have been actually many incidents like this around the country in which a young woman elected to the student council was more or less grilled and temporarily excluded from membership on that UCLA student council because of her affiliations with Israeli, Hillel, or I don't remember if it was Hillel, or some fairly mundane and if I may use the word, parva affiliation. It's not like she was a JDLnik, or I don't know if there are anymore anyway. But the university stepped in and reversed this. But there's no question that in a lot of college campuses, it's a divisive issue. And I think, frankly, if we're to be honest about it, within the Jewish world, Israel and differing positions on Israel, which a lot of us have, is a divisive issue even within the Jewish world. I don't think it's only from the outside. So I think we ought to just admit that this is an issue on which people will divide. Look, I'm unfortunate in that I live in a place where I have to drive 40 minutes for a minyan. I wish it weren't that way. On the other hand, I'm fortunate I live on a campus where there isn't a lot of anti-Israel action, and where boycott, divest, and sanction, thankfully, has not gotten any ground, because it makes, I know, plenty of friends who teach. Most of my colleagues do teach on campuses where that does happen, and it makes for a fairly uncomfortable atmosphere. I don't know, did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think the Palestinian issue
Yeah.
has become kind of another Jewish problem.
Well, it's become something on which Jews disagree, and there's no question about it.
I would just add the divisiveness of the Israel-Palestine issue within Judaism, within Jewish communities, is it's a problem for interfaith kids who arrive on college campus and want to explore their Jewish identities, want to attend Hillel, and feel that they have to take a stand on Israel when this is maybe something that they haven't thought about, they don't really want to think about. They're really just trying to go to Shabbat and learn about holidays. But it's become an issue that kind of shadows everything that goes on Jewishly on campuses right now, and it's unfortunate. I don't know what to do about it.
Hello. My question's completely different. So I'm wondering, with the study on the interfaith children, if you think maybe they might turn towards Unitarian Universalism because it naturally combines different faiths, and if that's kind of the root of the education, or if it's more you think they'll, maybe go to temple and church, or I'm wondering about the future of the combination when there's some philosophical differences within the faiths.
So Unitarian Universalism, UUism, has been a shelter, a safe space for interfaith families through generations, and I'm very appreciative of that. I should mention that my book is published by Beacon Press, which is a Unitarian Universalist press in its origins and still. So I'm not completely objective on this. But there are differences between what you get in a UU universe, a UU community, and what these interfaith families communities are doing. UUism, they draw from all religions, they're teaching all religions, and in the interfaith family community Sunday schools, religious education programs, because you're only doing two religions, I would posit you can go deeper in those two than if you're trying to sort of do everything. For instance, my kids started Hebrew in pre-K in our Interfaith Families Sunday school. And by the time my son decided he wanted to chant from the Torah at his bar mitzvah, he decided he wanted to learn the cantillation marks, to really learn how to do that and not just memorize it off a tape. So I think that's very different from being a Unitarian Universalist. Both could work for a family. I mean, all these pathways work. And when a family calls me from the middle of Kansas and says, I want to do what these people in your book did, how do I do this? I say, one, start a new group. And usually they're overwhelmed by that idea. Or two, find a group of 4 other families and just, meet with them on a certain schedule. But if they really want a community and they're not willing to form it themselves, or they don't have the time or the energy, I say look for your Unitarian Universalist community, because it's as close as maybe you will come. Or if they have the energy to do both. But the problem, a temple or a synagogue and a church, the problem with that has been pushback from the synagogues, that they don't want to allow families to double affiliate. And that's one of the things that I think needs to change. And specifically, there has been policy, even in Reform Judaism, to exclude families that are formally educating their children in both. The other problem with taking them to synagogue, one day and church the other, is that it doesn't give them a place to sort of integrate those two halves and to have other people like them who are doing both. And that's the power of these interfaith family communities that are specifically giving them a place to sort of integrate and unpack and make decisions, and also having a cohort of other kids that are going through it with them.
Hi, a question for Susan, but perhaps you as well, Alan. Can you give us some examples of how children sort themselves out with these two streams of religious education in terms of what they really take inside as opposed to learning about?
Yes, so one of the concerns about this is that it's going to be too dry, too intellectual, not allow, for that feeling of spirituality. And certainly in our group in Washington, D.C., we try to give them space to experience all of that. So we start our morning together with a gathering where we say the Shema, we sing, we reflect. The rabbi and the minister usually give a little mini reflection. And so we don't call it worship because we don't have a dogma, we don't have a common, theology. But it is certainly, for my kids, and even for me, a spiritual space. For me, it was incredibly inspiring to find that space after growing up sort of trying to always fit myself into a Jewish space where I always felt a little bit different. Of course, it's going to be different nowadays where the majority of kids come from interfaith families. But being in that space where I'm sitting with my husband and we're both totally equals in that community is for me a spiritual experience. So the kids, they differ. Some kids want an intellectual approach and some kids are spiritual. We take them on field trips, we walk labyrinths, we visit different types of churches, we visit different types of synagogues. We are preparing them on some level to make the choice that they will make in adulthood, but we don't put pressure on them about choosing or use a lot of that language. The way that we look at it is all human beings grow up to decide what they believe, where they want to affiliate, and how they want to practice. So it's not this terrible burden that we put on the shoulders of interfaith kids that they're going to have to choose. We all choose, and that's what Pew Research is showing with this tremendously high rate, especially of disaffiliation among millennials. So, and younger, they're moving away from all of this religious practice, and that's part of what Alan's worrying about. I would say all we can do is educate them and give them access to those kinds of spiritual experiences, and we'll see what's going to happen. But if we don't educate them, then for sure we're going to be in this downward spiral.
Yeah, again, I more agree than disagree with everything that Sue says. I do think that there's, in human nature, concentric circles of attachment, and you're more attached to your family, you'll do more for your family. You may or may not feel that for your neighbors. You will may or may not feel that for your countrymen. I mean, I think this is a lot of the debate about, multinationals. To me, I'm glad that the standard of living for people in Mexico and China has improved over the last couple of decades. I'm authentically happy for that, but I'm even more upset that the standard of living for people in Pennsylvania and West Virginia has declined. Now, that's not a rational thing, but I consider myself an American, and I am not embarrassed to say, although I realize it's irrational, to say I have a different level of feeling for my countrymen than just for anyone in general. So I think it's rather natural for humans to feel some sort of concentric circles of loyalty and obligation. The only other thing that I always do think, and this isn't a disagreement with Sue, but I think it's a problem for American Jews, is to somehow convey adequately, whether one's children or to non-Jews who don't quite get that Jewishness isn't really a religion. I mean, it's a very, very difficult thing to convey to people. And I know Sue understands this perfectly well, but a lot of people out in America don't. And if it's going to be Jewishness is always going to be presented principally as a religious option, I think it's not quite right in presenting what Jewishness is. So.
But I agree with that. And part of what I'm saying is we all have options in terms of, what we want to believe, what we want to affiliate, and how we want to practice. But kids born into interfaith families are connected by that sense of the civilization, of the culture, of the tribe, and we don't really have a choice about it. But then on the other hand, we get pushback about being able to claim it. So that's the tension.
Everyone can hear you.
I wonder what happens when one of your children, say at 30 or 35, or any age, decides they really want to be Christian or they really want to be Jewish. Do you think that in picking one religion over the other, there's a sense that the child is betraying the other parent? Say that your son wants to be Christian but feels guilty because he wants to be Christian and not Jewish. There's got to be some kind of an emotional attachment to this, sooner or later.
So it's definitely important for the parents not to put that kind of pressure or lobbying, And there are cases where that happens. And I think that's just not good parenting, frankly. What I saw among young people, especially in their 20s, who had this interfaith education is that when they imagined making a choice, they were not imagining choosing between their parents. They were imagining choosing in conjunction with their own future spouse. So when you think about it, that makes a lot of sense. And they felt confident that their parents would support them because the parents had been through it themselves a generation before. So, but what's interesting, there's a twist here. You think that a kid might say, well, if I'm going to marry a Jew, I'll become a Jew. In some cases, they were saying, if I marry a Christian, I want to be the Jewish one, because I want to replicate the interfaith family that I grew up in, and I want to give my children interfaith education. So they weren't necessarily imagining choosing the same religion as their future spouse. Sometimes they were imagining choosing the complementary religion.
Hi, this is a question for Sue. In your experience with raising children in an interfaith family, how do you explain the differences or fundamental differences in the beliefs on the religious side? You know,
Ask me the Jesus question.
yeah. So how do you work that into helping a young child understand and that there's not a right or wrong? I don't know, they're conflicting beliefs, so I'm curious.
Right. So the parents that do this, at least in the communities that I'm talking about nationally, have to be comfortable with the idea that they are not going to be telling their child what to believe. What we do is we present all of the possible ways of looking at God, for instance. I think the highest rate of interfaith marriage is actually the Christian atheist intermarriage. And there are a lot of, Jewish atheist, Christian atheist couples in our communities, and all of the various combinations that could exist. With Jesus, for instance, we teach them that there are people who believe that Jesus was a literary protagonist, and we don't even know if he existed. There are people who believe he was a historical figure, a rebel rabbi, an important figure in Jewish history who just didn't make it into the Jewish texts because he was born too late. Or the Son of God. What does son mean? What does God mean? You unpack that. And we never tell them, if your mother's Jewish, she believes this, and if your father's Christian, he believes that. Because you don't know what anybody believes until you talk to them. And so we tell kids, if your mom's Christian, go ask her what she believes about Jesus. But they're going to know that that's just one of many beliefs that exist and that are open to them, and that they will make their own decisions. And the decisions will change through time. They go through a stage where they take everything very literally, and they'll come home and tell you this happened and that happened. And you have to just keep your cool and nod your head and say, yeah, okay. And then a year later, they'll be an atheist, and then a year later, they'll be a Buddhist. So you just have to roll with it.
Thank you.
I will say this, I probably get asked, do you believe in Jesus, more than anyone in this room? I'm pretty confident of that. So my response is always the same, which is, yeah, I believe that Jesus was a great first century CE Jewish teacher, which of course is totally unsatisfactory as a response to my evangelical Christian students at the University of Oklahoma, because I've answered them actually what I do believe, but that's not really what they want to know. What they really want to know is something much more specifically Christian in, to use a fancy word, soteriological. They want to know, do I believe in Jesus as my personal Savior? That's really what they want to know. And so I usually try to drag this out a little bit as a teaching moment and then let them down easily that I don't believe in that.
Alan, thanks for raising the point about different parts of America and how you see the status of people in America. I kind of wonder, as I've been listening to the conversation this evening, how much this issue that we've been talking about is an American issue, and how do you see, both of you see this in post-pogrom, post-World War II diaspora around the world? I myself have family in Mexico, and I've seen a very, very close-knit, rather insular Jewish community there. I lived in London for a little bit, and I saw the same sort of thing there as well, although perhaps a little less so. And I'm wondering how much how much the idea of the American melting pot is creating this issue, and what are we seeing in other parts of the world?
Thank you, Bob. That's a big question, in my opinion. It is a big world, and we all know only pieces of it. I can tell you, first of all, you have examples that are examples that I think that as Americans we find very problematic. And I will say Israel is a good case where you don't have any marriage except for religious marriage. Muslims can only marry Muslims, Christians can only marry Christians, and Jews can only marry Jews. And I think that is not something, I mean, you can go to Cyprus and come back, you can go to Crete and come back, you can get married in the diaspora and avoid these issues, or you can just not get married at all, as many interfaith Israelis do in cities like Haifa and cities like Tel Aviv, Yaffa, where there's a pretty mixed population. I don't think that's a very healthy solution, in my opinion. Then, of course, you would have Western Europe, where I think there's been a very much of a bifurcation where you have either an English Jew, my wife's English, who grew up in Manchester, and I can tell you what has happened to English Jewry since the Second World War is that large numbers of English Jews have ceased to be Jewish, and I don't want to mince words about that. It's not a pluralistic country, and to the extent that America is. It's a Church of England country. It's a Anglican-dominated country. If you assimilate or intermarry in England, I do believe it's fair to say you lose your Jewish identity. On the other hand, you have in England growing numbers of English Jews who become Haredim, who become ultra-Orthodox. And there are more ultra-Orthodox Jews in England now than there were in 1945. And then France is yet another example because of a variety of reasons, including anti-Semitism. You have a high degree of aliyah. You have a high degree of committed French Jews moving to Israel. So there are so many different examples. I think you'd almost have to go country by country to break it down fully. But I think your impulse, I agree with. I think what we're talking about is very much an American situation.
I would just add, because I don't necessarily see the world through an exclusively Jewish lens, any country that has more than one religion is going to have interfaith families and related issues. In Europe right now, it's more Christians than Muslims that are intermarrying because the Muslim population is bigger density, they're older. In India, for instance, Hindu-Muslim intermarriage is a huge issue. In a lot of Asian countries, people are fighting for the right to have secular marriage, civil marriage, as in Israel. In a lot of places, religions control who marries and who gets buried and where. All of these things, for me, are a social justice issue that, as somebody from an interfaith family, I'm engaged with whether or not Judaism is one of the two religions involved.
Wait, I saw someone first, but maybe we'll do one and then two. And that can be.
Yes, I'm the one with the yarmulke on. I'm also the one that was brought up Reform. And every other week in 9th grade, we went to a different mosque, temple, church, and the interim weeks we talked about it. But also I was the one in the class in 9th grade that wore the yarmulke all the time. But my question is, I read not too many years ago that Cassius and Brutus prayed at the temple in Jerusalem, and Mark Antony had a cupola, an actual house made of stone, at the wall in Jerusalem. So this thing has been going on for some time. I guess also I remember in the 50s that This is before Jack Kennedy. Everybody took off their hats for Jack Kennedy. We wore yarmulkes being Reformed Jews. And that didn't work too well after a time. But I just have thought about your thoughts on that.
I'll let the Jewish historian answer most of that, but I just want to say that I'm impressed that your religious education program gave you that interfaith education, and part of what I'm advocating for is for all kids to get more interfaith education, for all adults to get more interfaith education. I think it's crucial, and there are Jewish communities now that are working on this, and it makes sense not just because the community is filled with interfaith kids, but because all of us have to get more education in order to tackle the problems of religious violence and intolerance.
Well, the archaeologists discovered in the 1970s something called the Aphrodisias inscription. It's a very important inscription. And what it shows is that the Jewish community of Aphrodisias, which was in Western Turkey, then called Asia Minor, had the Jewish community was comprised of Jews, converts to Judaism, and people who were called God-fearers. In other words, people who had abandoned pagan worship and were considered fully part of the community. In some ways, the Greco-Roman world and the world of Hellenistic Jewry would be my desired model for today. I don't think it would meet Sue's bar, but I wish that the Jewish community of today had as capacious a view of who was a member of the community, and therefore everybody would feel welcome in that Jewish community.
And this is for Alan to answer. It's something you brought up a little while ago about Jewishness. And I think the real challenge in this country, if you're not affiliated, and this has been a conversation for any number of years, how do you cultivate the Jewishness in order to preserve the tribe?
Well, once again, there's an awful lot that Sue and I agree on. One of the things we both agree on is that connectedness and belonging and community are terribly important. And in 21st century America, the absence of that is one of the worst things for, I think, our society and for the individual, too, in the long run, this rampant individualism. So I'll preface by saying that. I was going to bring some tchotchkes tonight, and then I realized it was just too kitsch. But since you ask, I thought a Jewish calendar. I give everybody. I got a ton of them because every time you write a check, you get a Jewish calendar, and I give them out like playing cards. I think people should have a Jewish calendar. People should have a bag of Hebrew alphabet letters they can stick on their refrigerator. I think it's really, I don't care if it's one letter, hey, or whatever. I think this sense of Hebraicness, even if you can never read or translate a passage of the Siddur, it doesn't matter. It's still a way to connect to something that's more than just religion. It's been the literature of our people. I think that it's okay to create this sense of being a member of a Jewish tribe in a cheesy way. Spin a dreidel or make a hamantaschen, just a few weeks away. It's a good thing to do.
I texted Alan a photograph of the Hebrew magnet letters on my refrigerator after I read his notes on this. I would just say, millennials and younger generations, Gen X, Gen Y, are fleeing from religious institutions. This is not being caused by interfaith marriage, although I think the exclusion of interfaith, couples is an issue, but studies have shown that they are alienated by oppression of women in traditional liturgies, and I'm talking across religions, by exclusion of LGBTQ people. These are the kinds of issues that are driving people away from religious institutions, and unfortunately that means then they lose that opportunity to have community. So, in my opinion, the institutions have to change those policies and that dogma. They have to evolve. I'm sorry, I'm going to use that word. In order to convince those younger generations to come back, that convince them that they can be the meaningful focus of community, or else they will find community elsewhere, but it may not be religious. So,
If I may, even though I'm not a member of a Reformed congregation, sometimes I hear you talking about it, and it sounds to me like you're talking about reform of a generation ago, because the Reformed congregations I know of, and have spoken at a lot of them, often have women rabbis. Their liturgies have generally been purged of male-dominated language, which I have no problem one way or the other. I don't care that much. LGBT is certainly very prominent in Reform and Reconstructionist rabbinical seminaries, never mind congregations. And I think just a few weeks ago, the Reconstructionist Rabbinical Assembly, or whatever they call themselves, decided that it would be okay for rabbis to have partners who were, I'm not sure, Christians or practicing ministers. So I would, not that there's not exclusiveness and religious intolerance to be found, I presume in all communities, but I think you're being a little harsh on reform as I know it in 2016.
yeah, that wasn't meant as a critique of Reform Judaism specifically. I mean, the statistics on this are probably more informed by Christian communities than Jewish communities, because this is, across the board. When they ask millennials, why are you not affiliated, these are boxes that they check. So there's an argument about, how vital Reform Judaism is at this point, and which way conservative Judaism is going to swing, and all of that. So.
Maybe we'll do one last question.
I haven't even really formulated a complete question. It's just because of something you just said. It makes me think about the period in the late 60s where a lot of young Jews didn't feel any, that they didn't feel affiliated or didn't feel a connection. And maybe that was due to the assimilation of, their parents and American society and everything. And they turned toward, a lot of them, Eastern religions. And some of them later, much, much later, went back and even ended up becoming modern Orthodox. So I wonder kind of how you compare what you say is happening with Gen X, Gen Y, millenniums with that generation who also didn't identify with it and sort of stepped away. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if that's really well formulated, but comparing those two periods of time where people couldn't relate to it.
Yes, I have thought that myself, and one response to that is Jewish renewal, where you have, in theory, the passion of orthodoxy with dogma that is more women, LGBT, and interfaith friendly. And not coincidentally, the new rabbi in my interfaith community is ordained in the Jewish renewal stream. So, and I don't think that's a coincidence. Our previous rabbi was a Jewish theological seminary, conservative, trained, became Reform after he decided to do interfaith marriages by force, But it's interesting that now, for our next rabbi, we've gone renewal.
I think Bob, let me just add a very quick thing. I think Bob's comment highlighted how important place is and comparisons over place when you make these things. And I think your comment highlights how important generations are when you're making these comparisons. I mean, the children of the 60s, Baba Ram Dass and Richard Bernard Glassman, and these guys, you know what? They were all children of second generation or immigrant Jewish families who had an entirely different historical memory of Christianity than kids growing up today. Kids growing up post-Vatican II, post desupersessionizing of Protestant Christianity, are growing up with Christians who think Jews are wonderful, who think that Judaism was a good religion, just not as good as ours. And this is a very different, I think, feeling from kids from my parents' generation. My cousin was telling me today in a restaurant how he still remembers being beaten up by Irish Catholic kids when he was a kid. And I think it only takes one generation for this kind of historical memory to change. The truth of the matter is Judaism and Christianity, if you're a historian, do not have the same kind of relationship as Judaism and Buddhism. That's for sure. So I think that's a factor too.
All right, we'll do one last question.
Sorry, you didn't talk about this, but I have another situation, which is a interracial marriage where one parent is atheist and then the other parent is Jewish. That's me. So just interesting, because I'm Alan's sister, and we have a completely different experience with Judaism because of that. I raised my two daughters as much as I could with the Jewish education, even though I didn't really have that much of one myself, a little. So they went through the whole experience of Hebrew school, learning Hebrew and bat mitzvahs. And today they just have little to no interest. And I don't think it's because of the interracial piece, because there was not a second religion, there was no competition. I really feel, and this is, I dare say this in the Jewish Museum, but and the audience here are all people who are interested, otherwise they wouldn't be here. But I really think so many kids today, religion is just so not what they're thinking about. I think that's really what's going on in my experience. What I hope for, in terms of what you've both brought forth, and this isn't really a question, but I think what I hope for is that the kids today will take some little iota of what we gave them, and what they'll come away with, instead of a focus on do you believe in Jesus or not, or God or not, is the morals that we're teaching through the religion. So what difference does it make if it's Buddhism or Christianity or Judaism? If we're teaching the right morals, that's what I'm hoping for. And I think that might also be part of the problem, is if we make the focus on the name of the religion, then the kids get turned off. So, I don't know, that's just, I don't know how you guys feel about that, but I think that's the more we push on that, the more we're going to lose the audience, if you will, of millennials. That's in my world. That might not be reflective of, we talk about the world at large. I think it's just so different, never mind country by country, but region by region, state by state, town by town, how people feel about religion. So, I don't know if you want to comment.
There are a lot of kids like yours. And there's a lot of religious institutions trying to figure out why.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank
you
you.
both.